form a quorum, so we will reopen the meeting and we'll move straight to item 13, Development Contributions Social Housing Rebate Scheme, Review of Scheme Criteria. Now, Gavin, thank you for the report. I think the report and the recommendations are reasonably clear, but are there any introductory remarks that you want to make before we move to any questions?
The only thing I need to raise is the development that triggered this review of the rebate scheme is a bit of a moving feast, and so the latest social housing component is now 28 units rather than the 53, I think that was in the report. And that seems to be the nature of this particular development. It's partly social housing and partly Kiwi build, and they keep looking at the proportion of each as part of the overall development.
So when you say it's a moving feast, it's not inevitable that the numbers would reduce, but a reduction in numbers is something that's been considered?
It's possible. We really don't know where they will end up, but we're hopeful that where they're at now, at 28, is as low as it goes.
Is there anything about that that would change your officer recommendation 1C around increasing the fund limit of the scheme from 1.5 to 2.5 million?
I don't think so, because there's also the risk that the development goes back up to where they initially indicated it would be. So I think to cover all bases, my recommendation would be that 1C stays as it is, and that the council does note that the scheme expires at the end of 2022, so there's the opportunity then to re-look at exactly what's going on with the scheme and how much money it really needs.
Yeah, and realising that this is revenue foregone rather than actual funds that we're putting on budget.
Correct.
All right, thank you. So no further comments. So let's move to any questions. Are there any questions on this? Anne?
Thanks, Gavin. Just to understand the other agencies involved in this space, so there are two mentioned in here, City Mission and OCHT. What other ones are involved? There's 6 mentioned.
The reference to the City Mission and the OCHT is that they have developments in the pipeline,
right,
that they will be in line to receive a rebate for.
Yes.
So other ones include the Oxford Terrace Baptist Church, the He Wakaho Trust, the Youth Hub Trust, Te Mahi Korowai Trust, Aotautahi Community Housing Trust. So that's, yeah, so there's a range of organisations that have developments in the pipeline.
Terrific. That's good, thank you. And I just another general question that you may not. Where does Kāinga Ora sit in terms of DCs? Do they get a rebate as government?
No, Kāinga Ora do not get a rebate. Yeah.
Right, that's really helpful. Thank you.
So just to clarify, Kāinga Ora do not get a rebate even though they're developing social housing? Correct.
They are... the rebate scheme was intentionally set up that way. So to qualify, you need to be either an accredited community housing provider or a charitable trust with one of your objects being the provision of social housing. So Kāinga Ora, or its predecessor, Housing New Zealand, was intentionally left outside of the scope of the rebate scheme.
Yeah, that's a useful clarification. Thank you. Yeah. For the benefit of those that weren't in the room for the previous question, I'll ask a similar question again. Your resolution, your recommendation 1C, increasing the funding limit of the scheme from 1.5 to 2.5 million, would you be able to just articulate the rationale for that increase, that recommendation to increase from 1.5 to 2.5?
The development by Home Investment Holdings, which is the builder that is building the development at Karamu, plus the developments in the pipeline that we know about, the DC rebates will be between 1 and 1.2 million, sort of in that range. So if it's not increased, somebody's going to miss out, and there'll be nothing left going forward. So it's just a matter really of how much we should have going forward if you want the scheme to continue.
Yeah, so in order to give effect to our housing policy, your recommendation would be to increase to 2.5 so that no one misses out and we achieve. So your expectation is that 2.5 would be sufficient or more than sufficient, but that 1.5 wouldn't be enough in order to achieve the objectives of the housing policy.
Correct. If it's not increased, I simply don't see that it's going to last beyond the next couple of months.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So just so I'm really clear, Given, if so, the Otatahi Housing Trust would could receive DC rebates out of this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Even though the government contracts that are funded well in excess of 100% of the cost of the build over a 30-year period.
They are a community housing trust that an accredited community housing provider, so they come within the scope of the policy.
Right.
I'm not aware that the government actually refunds their capital investment.
Or they get 130. Oh, anyway, that's
that might be a question for Bruce to answer. Bruce, if you could just explain the mechanism by which the Otatahi Community Housing Trust benefits from any government funding or government schemes in its build programme.
Yeah, so I will, and I'll also just talk about the totality of our policy approaches, and it is difficult once you start to look at things in isolation and compare it to what we're trying as an organisation, what the instructions you give to us is trying to achieve, which is a growth in social housing numbers, and how the various pieces come together. So in terms of the way that social housing is funded through the government, accredited organisations can get supply contracts that will pay back over time equivalent of a percentage of the market rent. And generally, at the moment, that is sitting between 135 and in extreme cases in parts of the North Island, up to around, I think, about 175% of market rent. The reason why you do that is to, one, get the supply there, two, that the costs of actually providing social housing are higher than providing market housing. What we do notice is that there is an increased level of maintenance required. And this is even before we start to look at things like wraparound services. So that will be often a 25-year contract, paying that amount while it's occupied. It's not built from a cost-up basis of rates, etc. It's looking at that percentage of market rent as the way of funding. Do you want me to spend some time talking about the policy framework, or are you comfortable with that? Yep.
I mean, it is clear in the report that the recommendation is aligned with the policy framework and the policy is adopted. I think that's been made clear through questions already as well.
Andrew, can I just signal in an amendment to 1C?
All right, so let's finish. Yeah,
oh,
so
sure,
I'll come back to you at the right time, but yeah, absolutely. Yep. So are there any further questions? So a mover for the staff recommendation, Melanie, seconded Jimmy. Yep.
May I have one more question?
Yes.
Okay, it's 5.6.4, the bullet point 4 in here. So if additional 35 to 80 new social housing units, it's not only limited by the City Mission and the Otatahi Trust, but also cover some other for the housing provider, am I right? Okay,
This is the fourth bullet point in 5.6.4.
Yeah.
An additional $1 million would provide rebates for approximately between 35 and 80 new housing.
Yeah, this one, yes.
Yeah.
They cover all the housing providers.
For the qualifying
Yeah,
housing
qualifying,
provider.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
And then additionally, Jimmy, there's the note around not agreeing to the increase, refers back to the do nothing option. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So moved by Melanie, seconded by Jimmy. So that puts the staff recommendation on the table. Now, Sam, you've noted an amendment.
Yeah, just to 1C, just to remain it at 1.5 million. And James Daniels is
Okay, so the amendment is to leave the funding limit at 1.5 and not increase to 2.5. Yeah. Yeah. Does that require an amendment, or could you not just vote against? I don't think it requires an amendment. It's the exact opposite. It's the so 1C is increase the funding limit, and the amendment is to not increase the funding. I don't think it requires an amendment.
The pool is 1.5.
You just vote against.
So by voting it against.
I'm quite happy to put 1C separately, and I'm quite happy for people to debate it. Yeah, now if the amendment is to not increase the funding, it's the polar opposite of 1C, which doesn't require an amendment. But, I mean, feel free to debate it, and I'll put 1C separately. All right, so I'm correct, aren't I? Okay, so the lawyer agrees with me. That's good. Okay, perfect. All right, so this has been moved and seconded. We're done with questions. Debate. Who wants to debate this? Sam.
I guess I have to now. Look, obviously, yeah, I'm happy with everything except for point C, 1C on that. And I don't say that because I don't think there's a place for social housing in Christchurch. I think that's entirely appropriate. The thing that concerns me with this is there are large government contracts which are being paid for by the taxpayer that we as a ratepayer are now picking up additional tabs for. And I can't see how that reconciles when there are massive government contracts being, there's millions of dollars every day being spent on social housing. And at the same time, we would effectively be encouraging the ratepayer to pay for that twice. So I'm quite alarmed by increasing that fund. It concerns me that the justification is some people will miss out. That's what's happening in social housing anyway. I think there is a place for it with some of the non-government agencies around the city mission and the like, but I'm deeply worried that we would be literally seeing the ratepayer pay for this twice, one through their taxes and then additionally through their rates here, and I'm not okay with that, so won't support 1C.
Sarah, and then Melanie, I'll come to you at the end as the mover. Sarah.
Thanks. Yeah, Sam's right, there's absolutely a place for social housing, and the reality is that we need a lot more of it than we currently have. And we end up, as ratepayers and taxpayers, not paying for the same thing twice, but this money enables more and additional social housing because the social housing sector will have more opportunity to build additional social housing with the funds that this allows. So it's not paying for the same thing twice, it's enabling additional social housing from the outcomes that are achieved from this.
Jimmy.
So at the moment, we are all aware, the environment, the situation of the Christchurch, still bigger the gap between the supply and the demand regarding all those social housing. And also we heard from the staff earlier, at the moment it's several kind of housing provider would like to, align with the council community housing strategy to assist them to provide all those housing, the community and the social housing to meet those low-income, vulnerable people's need. That's the fantastic, so we need to, to support this one. Yes, thank you.
Anne.
Kia ora, thank you. So Christchurch has always been a champion of providing community housing and social housing, community housing, and it's because of that we're in a much better place with that than other places around the country. So this supports staff recommendations support our council's community housing strategy, which is to incentivise and sustainably fund and support community housing. So let's continue in that fine tradition of providing housing for those who are not in a position to have financially to get their own place. So we all benefit from providing safe, safe, warm, dry housing for those who are not in the fortunate position to have the ability to have their own place, to buy their own place. So, fully supportive.
James, and then I'll come to Melanie at the end. James.
Thank you. Look, if you want to see an outcome and you don't want the council to necessarily be undertaking that activity themselves, then an incentive of a financial nature is a good way to achieve that. There is a connection here and there is a point to where I'm going with this, but the Central City Residential Rebate Scheme was created for a purpose. That's because for our city to be successful, we want to have more people living in the central city. We want to make it more affordable for the purchasers to be able to buy those properties and tip the balance. And it makes it a more attractive proposition from a development perspective. So that works. I've supported it. And the fact of the matter is it's an outcome that I want to see. There's a need for it, and just as there's a need for more people to live in the central city, there is also a need for more social housing in Christchurch. There is an undersupply, and people are suffering, and they're living in places that are not warm and grossly below par. So there is a need. There is a need for this. It's not money paid for by the council. It's foregone revenue. And I think for consistency, if there's one outcome that I believe we should be supporting, which is more residents in the central city, then on the other hand, I also believe that this is a genuine need, and I think incentivising it's a cheap way for the council to be able to incentivise an outcome that's going to make Christchurch a better place. So equally, I'm happy to support that, and I'm also happy to support it at the $2.5 million level as well in 1C.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also happy with this in its entirety, so happy with the staff recommendation. There is a place for social housing. There is a need for social housing. I think we see that regularly. And there's also a need for support for social housing. And it's great that governments have got schemes and systems in place to do that. But I don't think that absents council from performing the role that it has in supporting that need for social housing and, in fact, its own housing policy. This is really about a best for city approach. And I think anything other than the staff recommendation, putting what we know to be too little of an amount in place, having the cap too low on this, would actually bring about a suboptimal outcome. We've heard from staff that if we went with the 1.5 million, some providers would inevitably miss out because the funding would be used up. We would get to the cap within a matter of weeks. We've heard from Sam MacDonald that there are some organisations that he would not want to miss out, who are those that are not co-funded by government. Of course, there's a risk that that could be an outcome because, as we've heard from staff, we don't know which provider it would be that we would miss out, that would miss out. So that could easily lead us to that suboptimal outcome that I've just described. Not putting enough money on budget for something that we've already, or not putting enough money within the cap for something that through our own housing policy that we adopted quite recently we are wanting to achieve makes no sense at all. And all the reasons we would do this and all the reasons that we would put a sufficient cap in place, realising that this isn't a budget, it's revenue foregone, so it's revenue that we're not budgeting for so that we get a particular social outcome, to not put the required cap in place in order to achieve our own policy recently adopted makes no sense at all to me. So for that reason, I support these changes to the scheme, and I particularly support putting enough of a cap around the funding in place to actually deliver what we're wanting this to achieve, rather than cutting it off at its knees before we even start this next phase. James.
Are we voting on just 1A, B and 2 and doing 1C separately?
I'm going to put C separately.
Yes, cool.
Yeah, but we're debating everything in the one debate at the moment.
Oh, okay. Well, I do support 1A, B and 2, but we'll be supporting, obviously, 1C. C. Yep.
Yeah, so you'll be supporting the 1.5, not the 2.5.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before I come to Melanie as you close the debate, is there anybody else wanting to speak? All right, so Melanie, I'll come to you last.
There's no point me even speaking. Everybody's already said everything, so it was brilliant. Thanks very much.
All right, so I'll put the whole of the motion, in fact, no, what I'll do is put 1C first. All right, so all of those in favour of 1C, say aye. Aye. Against? No. Okay, can we take a division on that, please?
Okay. Councillor Galloway? Yes. Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor McLeod? Yes. Councillor Goff? Yes. Councillor McDonald?
No.
Councillor Cotter? Aye. Councillor Davison? Aye. Councillor Chu? No. Councillor Coker? Yes. Councillor Templeton? Aye. Councillor Daniels?
Carl.
Councillor Chen? Yes. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 4.
All right, thank you. So that's C is carried. So in that context, I'll put the rest of the...
Oh, Aaron, sorry. Sorry, I didn't see. And Councillor Keogh? No. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4 against.
Okay, so that's carried. So in the context of C being carried, I'll put the rest of the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.